This is the Penderwicks in Spring, Chapter 18, Beethoven. When Batty knocked on Mrs. Grenfeld's door the next day at recess, she was determined not to cry. "Welcome!" cried Mrs. Grenfeld, opening the door. "And how was your weekend with your mentor?" Batty started to cry. She stumbled to the piano bench and cried and cried. And when Mrs. Grenfeld handed over tissues and hugged her, Batty cried more. "I've lost my singing voice," she finally managed to say. "Lost it? In what way?" Batty croaked out a few words of the itsy-bitsy spider, then started crying again. "You have a sore throat?" Batty shook her head. "No, it's not that." Mrs. Grenfeld gently massaged Batty's throat. "No swollen glands?" "No." Batty shook her head again. Mrs. Grenfeld now held her at arm's length and inspected Batty's face with great attention. "Perhaps you'd better tell me about your weekend." Batty told her as much as she could, leaving out, of course, the conversation. Even without it, it was a sad tale. "Your Geoffrey abandoned you," said Mrs. Grenfeld when Batty had finished. "Yes, I know. Though it wasn't completely his fault, my sister made him leave." "He could have stood up to her. Teenage boys are not the most reliable of creatures." "He used to be," said Batty sadly. "What if he doesn't want to be my mentor anymore?" "Has he told you that?" "No. Until then you must not be concerned. Anyway, one doesn't need a mentor to sing. One needs only the talent and the will, and you have both." "But my voice—" "Yes, let's see about that. Stand up and breathe for me. Deep breaths." Mrs. Grenfeld watched as Batty breathed. "Fill your lungs all the way to their bottom." Batty tried to fill her lungs. Oh, how she tried. And when she got to the bottom of her lungs, there was that knot in her stomach, pressing up against them. "That's the best I can do. Oh, Mrs. Grenfeld." And here she was, crying yet again. Mrs. Grenfeld didn't fuss, which helped greatly. She simply handed Batty another tissue and said, "Now you see how unhappiness can affect our breathing. Try again. Take in a breath, slowly, slowly. That's right. Relax, think only of your breathing. Yes, that's better." And Batty indeed felt the tension ease up a tiny bit. Not enough, though. Not nearly enough. "I can't stand this," she said. "Yes, you can stand it, because you must," said Mrs. Grenfeld. "Let's not even try to sing today. Instead, we'll discuss the rhythm of breathing, how different singers choose when to take a breath. Does that sound interesting? Yes? Then let us begin with a song of great yearning, written by Anthony Newley and Leslie Bracus. I will speak the song line by line. You will repeat what you hear, including the breathing. After that, you will listen to how Mr. Newley sings his song. Are you ready?" "Yes." "Who can I turn to?" Mrs. Grenfeld nodded at Batty. "Now you." But Batty had started to cry again. Mrs. Grenfeld wrapped her arms around the sobbing girl and kept hold of her for a long time. When Batty got home after school, Jane said that a large box had come for her in the mail and was waiting on the kitchen counter. Batty's first inclination was to turn around and leave again, hoping the box would disappear on its own while she walked Duchess and Cilantro. It was sure to be a birthday present from someone, and the closer Batty got to her birthday, the more it horrified her. However, the box would still be sitting there when she got back. Besides, this one might possibly be from Aunt Claire, Uncle Turin, Marty, and Enum. While she didn't deserve a present from them any more than from anyone else, sometimes Marty and Enum drew pictures of tigers and turtles on the outsides of the package, and that would be nice to see. But the return address was Geoffrey's. Tentative, she touched it, then pulled back. Did she really want anything from Geoffrey right now? The doorbell rang, and Jane was letting people into the house. Batty heard Artie and both Donovans. In a minute Jane would be in here looking for pretzels and asking what was in the box. when Batty was going to open it, and if Batty did open it, Jane would want to discuss Geoffrey's present, and then maybe Skye would come in too. Batty picked up the box. It took both hands and ran upstairs with it to her room. Asimov was waiting for her, stretching and yawning, in his spot between Funty and Gibson, and wondering what all the fuss was about. He wondered more as Batty struggled to get through the layers of tape Geoffrey had used to secure the box. Then came the opening of the box, and the digging through the crumpled newspaper used for cushioning, and then there were 2 smaller packages inside, each covered with gift wrap, and again, lots of tape. Each had a note attached. The note on the larger one, which was shaped exactly like record albums, said, "Open me first." The note on the smaller one, shaped something like a book, said, "Open me second." Another struggle with tape, and Batty revealed the bounty inside, "Open me first." It was indeed record albums, a pristine set, still in its original box and plastic wrapping. Batty traced with her fingers the words on the cover, "Ludwig van Beethoven, 9 Symphonien, Berliner Philharmoniker, Herbert von Karajan." "Von Karajan," Batty told Asimov. Geoffrey had once wanted to be an orchestra conductor, long ago when he first met the Penderwicks. He'd since moved on from that, saying that while a conductor couldn't make music without a whole bunch of musicians agreeing to be conducted, a pianist needed only his piano. But he'd retained his fascination with the breed and had taught Batty about the famous ones, Bernstein and Muti, Klemperer and Previn, Solti and Azawa, and about this very Herbert von Karajan, one of the 20th century greats. This had to be an old recording, decades and decades old. Batty marveled at how such a treasure could stay untouched for so many years, waiting for someone to release its magic. Geoffrey had taped, lightly, thank goodness, a card to the box. The picture was of a cat playing the piano, which Batty liked very much, although Asimov swatted at it when she showed him. But the note inside was even better. "Battykins. Some consider this the finest recording ever of the symphonies. We'll listen to it together, especially the Eroica, which you know is my favorite. Someday when, I'm allowed back into the fold. Until then, happy birthday from Ludwig, Herbert, and Geoffrey. P.S. Fine mentor I've turned out to be, missing our breakfast. Hope you can forgive me." "I do forgive you," she breathed. "But wait, what about the second package?" She groped around the bed and found it buried under the wrapping paper from the symphonies. This one had its card on the outside, taped underneath, "Open me second." Another cat, another piano. Batty didn't bother showing this one to Asimov, and another note. "Do you remember giving this to me on my 11th birthday? A long time ago. You were only 4. Because it was your favorite photo, you said that maybe I'd let you borrow it back someday. This seems like the right day to me. Yours, Geoffrey." Trembling, Batty ripped away the wrapping. It wasn't a book, she was almost certain, because she was starting to remember. Yes, she was right. It was a framed photograph, the one she'd been looking for everywhere, the one it came back to her now, that she kept beside her bed when she was small, until she'd given it away to Geoffrey. Hound. That evening after dinner, Ben put the final touch on Minnesota, gluing a final Monopoly hotel to St. Paul. It was due the next day, and Ben couldn't wait to show it off. His would be the best state in the second grade except for Raphael's, whose Florida would be just as good because best friends don't compete with each other. There was this problem, though. Minnesota now held so many rocks that Ben could no longer pick it up by himself. Actually, he hadn't been able to pick it up since gluing on the Sawtooth Mountains. Batty had told him that she'd help him carry it to school, but Ben thought he'd better remind her. Her bedroom door was closed, and loud music was blasting through, classical music played by an entire orchestra. He knocked hard, and then harder. But when she didn't answer, he tried pushing the door, but it wouldn't budge. Something was blocking it. This was nuts. Blocking doors was what Ben did, not Batty. He pounded on the door until it flew open, and Batty yanked him into the room. One glance at her, and Ben was ready to leave again. She had an air of recklessness about her, reminding him of how Raphael had been that time just before he leapt off the jungle gym and broke his arm. "Changed my mind," he said. "Goodbye," he said, but Batty was already blocking the door again, wedging a chair under the doorknob. Then she turned down the music so they could better hear each other. "I'm glad you're here. I'm calling a Moips." "Another one? We just had one." Now Ben saw the pile of money on Batty's bed. Lots of bills. Something big was happening, and he didn't like it. Maybe the reason Batty had been so strange lately had to do with money. Maybe their parents really had gotten poor, way beyond being careful poor. And Batty was going to give them her dog-walking money. Ben still had $3 left from his rock-digging money, which he'd been saving for his first movie camera. But he couldn't let Batty have all the nobility. "Are you giving that money to Mom and Dad?" he asked, "because I have some too if they need it." "No, I'm using it for myself." Batty picked up her backpack and dumped it. Schoolbooks and pens clattered onto the floor. Then she slid the money into an inside pocket and zipped it shut. "Then you're sure you're not dying? Because you look kind of crazy right now. This is awful." "How many times do I have to tell you I'm not dying, you goop? Calm down so that we can start." "Moips come to—" "What about Lydia? She should be here if it's a meeting of the younger Penderwicks. This is really just for you. We'll call it a MOBAB, meeting of Batty and Ben, okay? Please." Ben shrugged his reluctant agreement, feeling the heavy weight of the Penderwick family honor. "Thank you," said Batty. "MOBAB, meeting of Batty and Ben come to order. Both of us to swear to keep secret what is said here from everyone, including parents, older sisters, Nick, and even Raphael." They bumped fists and swore. Batty turned the music back up a little just in case someone was lurking in the hallway. "I'm taking the bus to Boston tomorrow to see Jeffrey, and no one else knows but you, not even Jeffrey. I'm going to surprise him." Ben had been to Boston. It seemed very far away to him. Not so far as Maine, where they went in the summer, but still really far. "You can't. You'll get lost or kidnapped." "No, I won't. I have to see Jeffrey." "Why?" "Because he'd asked for her forgiveness, and she wanted to give it to him in person. Because he'd sent her a perfect set of Beethoven symphonies. Because not only had he kept her photo of Hound safe for years and years, he'd known just when to give it back to her. But Ben wouldn't understand any of that, except maybe the part about the photo, and Batty had already hidden it away in her closet, where no one could see it, and pry into her feelings. "I just have to," she said. "Sky might never let him come here again, and I want to see him." Ben was learning a painful life lesson about secrets. He'd gotten sucked into keeping Batty's Quigley Woods adventure a secret, and now she was expecting him to hide a much more dangerous adventure. Not only that, but he'd just promised Nick to report anything he needed help with. And oh boy, he needed help with this, but couldn't report it because he'd just sworn an oath of secrecy. "My head is going to explode," he said. "There's no reason for your head to explode." He tried to reason. "Mom and Dad will be furious. Just think about the trouble you'll get into, especially if you're kidnapped. They might not be poor, but they don't have enough for ransom money." Batty didn't like the idea of making her parents worry. She was almost certain that she could make it into Boston and back home before they noticed. Or so she told herself, in order to keep her courage high. "Ben, I promise I won't get kidnapped, and Mom and Dad, I'll call them if I'm going to get home later than they do. Does that make you feel better?" "No, it does not. What about school? You could get thrown out for cutting. Not for doing it just once." "Anyway, let them throw me out," she said, and almost meant it. "Then I won't have to write those stupid, horrible, idiotic book reports. Never, ever." Batty paused, listening. And now Ben heard it too, over the music. Across the hall, Sky was knocking on Ben's door and telling him it was time for his bath. "Tell her you're going to Boston," he whispered urgently to Batty. "Haven't you been listening?" she hissed. "Sky's the last person I'd tell. And if you tell her, you have no honor, Ben Penderwick. Skye was now knocking on Batty's door. Ben, are you in there? Ben looked at Batty, who nodded, but with a face full of warning. Yes, I'm here, Ben called back. I'll have my bath soon, thank you. They listened for more, but Skye had gone away. Tell Jean, then, said Ben. Or Rosalind. Call Rosalind and tell her. No, said Batty, and no, they'd try to stop me, and I won't be stopped. Ben suddenly remembered what had brought him here in the first place. If you cut school, he wailed, how will I carry Minnesota? Batty had this already worked out. I'll walk you to school like normal, then not go in. Someone else can help you get Minnesota inside, and I'll run back to the bus stop. But in the afternoon, you'll have to ask Raphael to walk home with you. He's as goofy as you are, but between the two of you, you should be okay. Ben felt like he was aiding and abetting a great crime. I wish he wouldn't go. But she plowed on, relentless. If something goes wrong and I don't get back in time, you might need to help with Lydia, like telling her a bedtime story. Batty, what story would I tell her? Here, Batty's planning had failed her. Everything else she'd figured out in detail. Bus schedules, ticket prices, how to get from the bus station to Jeffrey's school, subway and trolley, and whether or not the Beethoven symphonies would fit in her backpack so that she and Jeffrey could indeed listen to Eroica together. No, they wouldn't fit. She'd even already informed Duchess's and Solantra's families that she wouldn't be doing a dog walk tomorrow. But it was painful to think of leaving Lydia behind, more so than her parents even. Lydia was now used to having Batty sleep in the big girl bed in her room. If Batty didn't get back in time... If you don't know any stories, just sing the Itsy Bitsy Spider for her. Batty reflected that it might even be a treat for Lydia after having witnessed the wreck of Batty's voice, but I'll do everything I can to be back home in time. You'd better, he said, because if I end up having to sing Itsy Bitsy Spider to Lydia, I'll never forgive you. She looked at him sadly. There was a lot of that going around in her family. All right, she said. This concludes the Mobab. And that is the end of chapter 18.